I have the pleasure to moderate today's important session. I'd like to start by reminding of the overall framework that informs this series of sessions, which started on July 27th. ERF and its partners are presenting Global South perspectives on the future of work. The concept framing this series reminds us that work is a basic universal right, and so are decent conditions of work. Work is also a factor of production alongside land, capital, and technology. The revolution in technology and artificial intelligence has been provoking a raging argument about the benefits and risks for humanity. Some argue that technology is creating jobs and more leisure time for some. Others argue that technology is threatening jobs. The World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs report of 2020 stated that automation will destroy 85 million jobs, and artificial intelligence and related technologies will create 97 million jobs in the global economy. The IMF in 2018 anticipated that real wages will move upwards with the adoption of new technologies. Our series so far has shown how much more complex this picture is in the Global South, including in the MENA region. The series has shown that we need to take a careful look at education and labor skills, economic competitiveness and productivity, labor market institutions, demographics, and mobility trends. Our session today focuses on structural inequalities embedded in wealth, gender, race, regional discrepancies, and more. Our panelists are concerned about the likely challenges that MENA will face because of embedded inequalities, which will most likely hamper our ability as a region to take advantage of technology and artificial intelligence. In our conversation today with our distinguished panelists, we want to understand to what extent structural inequalities embedded in the region affect the ability of workers and economic systems to absorb and implement technological change. I'm glad to have with us today a great set of scholars and researchers. I welcome Professor Paul Makdisi from the University of Ottawa, Professor Adel bin Youssef, University of Nice, Sofia Antipolis. What a great place to be in, Professor Adel. They will explain the magnitude of the digital divide in MENA and how to close the digital gap, whether it's driven by age, gender, race, ethnicity, or other drivers. Dr. Shahid Yusuf from George Washington University will highlight who are the most vulnerable in terms of access to technology and skills, and what this means for the region's ability to harness the positive impact of technology. And finally, Vladimir Lasny from UNESCO will zero in on technology and wage inequality, telling us what can be done to address its negative impacts. Participants are encouraged to use the Q&A button to write up their questions to the panelists during the course of the session. Following the interventions by panelists, I will avail the floor to address the questions, and participants who want to speak directly with us will be unmuted by our ERF IT colleagues. I will prompt people to speak. Our dear distinguished panelists, kindly introduce yourselves before each of you starts to speak. We will go in the following order: Professor Paul Makdisi, Professor Adel bin Youssef, Dr. Shahid Yusuf, and finally, Vladimir Lasny. Each panelist will have 20 minutes for his intervention. I'm saying his intervention because it is a male panel, as you all see. I'm very happy to be with you today. Over to you, Professor Paul.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. So I'm going first. So I would have hoped to go later. So I'm, as was said, I'm a professor of economics at the University of Ottawa, and I've worked my entire career on inequality measurement and the impact of public policy on inequality, and I'm also an associate editor of the Journal of Economic Inequality. So let me share with you, I'm trying to find the right window, some slides that I've prepared as a professor. We are used to use slides to lay out our ideas. So when ERF approached me to talk about the topic of the impact of the digital economy on the future of inequality in the Arab world, I started thinking about this. So this is not a topic on which I've done research. So what I would present you today are my thoughts on the topic, and it may lay down the floor for future research that may be needed to better capture this idea. So I started by thinking, so what would be the potential benefit of this digitalization? And then I will come to the cost of the digitalization. And when I'm talking about benefit and cost, it's in terms of inequality. Most of you know, I assume that people who are listening today are from the MENA region, that Arab countries' economies have been characterized as crony capitalist economies. My intuition, and it's an intuition, it's not a causal interpretation, is that this state of affair is highly due to the fact that those countries are among the most unequal country in the world when we take into account the top of the wealth and the income distribution in these countries. I refer here to some work of Alvarado, Aswad, and Piketty on the region. So if we look at survey, we don't get this result, but survey are representative of the population. If wealth and income are in the hand of the few, this is not captured by a survey, and the work of these researchers highlighted that when you account for that, these countries are highly unequal, and probably this crony capitalist structure is linked with this inequality. So the first thing that we can think is that if we move to a more digitalized economy, there will be more competition in the digitalized sector. So this will reduce the market and political power of these cronies, and this channel will tend to decrease inequality and inequality of opportunities in this region. However, the digitalized economy globally is characterized by important concentration of market power. So I was thinking about this yesterday. So I looked at how the top of the distribution of wealth in the world is characterized. And if we look at the top 10 richest person in the world, 6 among them are in businesses in the digital sector. So Jeff Bezos, of course, with Amazon, Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, Larry Page from Google, Larry Ellison is a software business user, and Sergey Brin. And among the 4 who are left, Elon Musk's initial wealth was due to business early in his career, businesses in the digital economy. So here it seems that there is a link between the big concentration of wealth and the digitalization, or all these businesses that are in this new industry. So if this concentration of wealth in Arab countries have brought us to crony capitalism, I'm pretty afraid that globally we may move in a direction like this. These people here have a lot of power. Just to give you an idea, so let's step out of the Arab world and look at the US. So the US is, of course, the richest country in the world. If we look at the median net wealth in the USA, it's $97,400. And just to give you an idea, if you pile up $50 bills for $97,400, it gives you 0.1948 meters. So it's approximately that. So it's pretty small. Now, if we want to put this in perspective, let's think of a person who has $1 million. So because here I'm doing this exercise because people don't capture the extent of this wealth concentration. So if we pile up $1 million in $50 bills, so same exercise for the millionaire, it will give you something of 2 meters, so slightly higher than me. If you take Jeff Bezos' wealth and you pile up $50 bills on top of each other, you will get a pile of 414.6 kilometers. So to give you an idea, the International Space Station, so these guys now, they love to go into the space. So the International Space Station, it's 408 kilometers from Earth. So this pile of Jeff Bezos' wealth, you will reach the International Space Station and you will have 3 billion left to go a little bit further. So this gives you an idea of the extent of this inequality. And with this inequality will come inequality in political power. And this is really worrying. I'm not the only one who worries about this. I think that the new president of the US is trying to figure out what to do with these businesses. The idea is that this is not the first time it happened in the economic history. With the Industrial Revolution, it happened, and we know that some measures have been put in place to break some monopolies and reduce market power in the US. They didn't kill anybody. They didn't make a big revolution. The Rockefeller monopoly was broken. They're still rich today, so they didn't suffer that much from that, but they stopped the wealth accumulation at some point. So, so this part of the digitalization may increase inequality globally, and of course, this will impact in the MENA region and in particular the Arab countries. Now, let's look at how do we think that people, so workers in the Arab countries, will be able to capture this technological change. And then I said, okay, so how can I have a first grasp of this? How will this be distributed? So if I look at the usage of internet, so it gives me the idea of how people are close to technology. I get a very polarized picture in the region. So here I'm using the Arab Barometer, the Wave 5. So this is 2018. So if you look at the lowest bar, which is for Yemen, you have here 44% of people who use internet at least once a day or throughout the day. So the orange and blue bar. And on the other end, you have 46% of people who don't use internet at all. So no connectivity here. So you have here this big polarization between two groups in Yemen. And if you look at other countries in the region, you have a similar picture, except for a few countries where internet usage is more widespread. Now, I don't have the time to go into details, but if you look, for instance, at Egypt, Egypt is half of the Arab world. So let's look at this country. If you want to look at how it is divided, so let's first look at gender. So it seems here that we have also a kind of gender story here. No internet usage is more important among female than among male. And if you look, I don't want to present a graph for everything, but if you look at other correlation, polarization, and gender difference are attenuated when you look at the younger group. So this gives us a little bit of hope, but it's still very pronounced in the 30 to 49 age group, which is the main working age group. Employed women here in Egypt are similar to employed men. So once you look at women who are in the labor market presently, their internet usage is the same as men. So for this group of people, this will not, the digitalization may not change that much the inequality, the gender inequality. But for others, it will not, if it gives new opportunities, it will be biased to man. And also there is, if you look at the numbers, an important socioeconomic gradient, and this is no surprise in internet use. Uh, Also, when we think of digitalization, we think of some accumulation of human capital. And if we look how the Arab world does in terms of tertiary education, so I'm assuming here that to get those good jobs in the digitalized economy, you need tertiary education. So if you look at female and male, it's a similar picture. The Arab world is doing better than the rest of the world as a whole, and women are not doing are not less attending tertiary education than men. I know that it's not very clear, but the top line for men is 40% and the top line for women is 45%. And if you look at the graph, it ends up approximately at the same place. Now, this gender equality in tertiary education, unfortunately, does not translate into equality on labor market participation. And this is a thing that we should think of and think about how digitalization may affect this. So if you look at different countries in the region, the ratio of labor market participation of female to male is very low from a global perspective. And this, and now the question is, will digitalization improve that? So I don't have a clear answer, but let's think a little bit about this. So two things may explain this low female participation in the labor market. So it may be a supply side story or a demand side story. I don't have here a complete picture, but let's look at some hints from the literature. So supply of labor is people looking for a job. So are women willing to participate? Are families of women willing to let them participate in the labor market? So there was an interesting RCT that ran in Saudi Arabia by Burstein Gonzalez and Yanagiza Wadrat. It was published in the American Economic Review last year. And it seems that Arab men don't have a clear picture of how Arab men think. So in Saudi Arabia, it seems that most young married Arab men actually favor women getting a job. So we're talking here about young Saudis that are married, but they also at the same time, they think that other young Arab men are not favoring women participating in the labor market. So they call this pluralistic ignorance. So each one is in favor, but the person doesn't know that his counterpart, the other man, are in favor. This is a very easy, there are very easy solutions there. So it seems that the young generation in Saudi Arabia, and probably it is similar elsewhere in the Arab countries, is very open to female participation in the labor market. They just don't know that the others are also open. So the policy solution to that are relatively easy. Also, I don't have the quotation here because it's too far in the back of my mind, but they also, some RCTs have highlighted the fact that women would tend to participate more in the labor market if they are self-employed. And of course, digitalization with remote work give this opportunity of contracting in this labor market. Now, unfortunately, if we look at the demand for labor, there is an interesting ongoing work by Adam Hamad Osman at the University of Illinois. And he has run an RCT. The RCT is done. Now he's writing the paper. I talked a little bit with him. And so this was done in Egypt. And he finds that employers directly admit that they prefer to hire men than women. So it's, you don't need here, you don't need to run an audit survey. They say it explicitly. I prefer to hire a man over women. At the same time, when they look by industry, the IT sector you have 21% of employer that prefers to hire men over women, so almost 80%, so 79% don't have this preference in the IT sector. If you compare this to other sectors, this is better. And if you compare to the retail sector, 62% prefer to hire men over women. So moving to a more digitalized economy here may favor the presence of women or the demand for a women worker in the labor market. But it will not totally, the gender gap here will not totally disappear, because there is still some discrimination in the IT sector. This is for Egypt, but we can think of probably something similar elsewhere. But it will improve, but it will not solve everything. And this concludes what I had to say today.
Thank you very much, Professor Paul. In fact, I'm glad you started out because it was good to start out by reminding our listeners and watchers that there is inequality in MENA. I am often surprised how many are still walking around who do not think that MENA has an issue of inequality. We've inherited this from earlier times when we thought we were better than South America, for instance. We might have been, but this is no longer the case. And thank you for reminding us of that. And thank you also for reminding us that technology is associated on the global level with high concentration of wealth. And you gave the information for that. And thanks finally for the light at the end of the tunnel, that at least the data on Egypt shows that maybe women participation in the labor market could benefit a little bit from the IT sector gaining prominence in the future. Let's see if this holds in the other presentations and in the conversations. We move on now to our next speaker. And now I have to look at my own order. Give me 1 second. That's Professor Adel Ben Youssef. Over to you, Professor Adel.
Thank you very much, Noah. I would like to share my screen also, since Paul has shared his screen and show some slides. I will do the same. I'm Adel Ben Youssef. I'm Assistant Professor of Economics at the University of Côte d'Azur, Nice, and involved in several things in Tunisia. Especially, actually, I'm working with the GIZ for the future of the labor market in Tunisia. And we have also another project about the Industry 4.0 in Tunisia. And I am writing the white paper on Industry 4.0, how this technology will impact the labor market and how the government can handle these issues. I started working on digital divides in 1999, when I was recruited in the University of Paris. They asked me at the time to set up a symposium about digital divides. And the first one we have organized was in 2001, the big event about digital divides. And since that, I have worked on this. Let me I would like to highlight two things. If you look at some key figures, you can see here, for example, just in one slide, the situation currently in the region, in MENA region. And as you see, for the mobile indicators, we are around 95% of people are connected to mobile networks. 90% of people are connected to the 3G, and 61% are connected to the 4G. So really, we have this catch up about mobile is happening, and this is very important. But when we look at the older technologies, for example, internet access with broadband, it's still only 8%. And that's mean that really we have catch up with new technology, and this is very important. I will try to explain later why. But overall, these are the indicators. We have 58% of households in the Arab region have internet access at home. 52% have a computer at home. And we still have some divide, especially the gender divide is here. And it's really, and two over three people aged between 15 and 24 years currently are using internet. But when we discuss, when we talk about digital divide, we need to keep in mind that we have at least 4 levels of digital divide. And we need to, when we say digital divide, we need to show what kind of digital divide we are referring to. Let me at least propose here to focus on these 4. The first one is the inequality of equipment or infrastructure. That means that we have people who access to some technology and people who have not these technologies. And you are trying to characterize the situation regarding they have not. With internet, broadband, or with computer, or any other technology. You can find several types of divides depending on the technology that you are looking for. But having not this technology does not inform us about the use of this technology. That means that the second type of digital divide refers to the usage of this technology. That means that you have internet, but are you using it for what kind of purpose? Are you using it for e-learning, to do e-commerce, to make e-administration operation, or what else? So here we are not talking about having or having not. We are talking about the depth of adoption. That means that how many e-services your population are using, what kind, the diversity of these services, etc., etc. And here you will find so many other digital divides. For example, for so many countries, they have produced so many e-application, e-services, but the population are not using them, even if they are connected and they have access to the technology. So we need to be careful because the first level is just having not. The second one is using or not using, and what is the intensity of the usage. For some technology, this intensity is very key because when you reach a kind of threshold, then you will have some impacts. When you have just a small usage of the technology, you cannot have any impact, even if you have the technology. And we have found this during the lockdown of the COVID-19. Because, okay, in the MENA country, we have access to the technology, and I have shown you the slide with the indicator. But the lockdown forced us to use this technology. And here, we found that in some countries, for example, in my country, in Tunisia, the education was stopped because the teacher said that they are not able to use this technology. So it's not about equipment of the education system, it's about the user of this technology. And the question of the usage is very important also because in some cases, we have tried to characterize the surplus, the consumer surplus that you gave this users. And we have, for example, seen that for the France, it's give you the equivalent of 2,107 and $2,651 per year. That means that the people that are using this technology, the technology, internet, etc., may have a surplus, and this surplus of consumer is greater when they use it efficiently. But the third level of the digital divide informs us about the skills, the learning process. That means that these technologies are evolving, as I have said it Monday, because we have several waves of technology arriving. We have not the same technology that we are observing. We have different types of technology. We have Internet 1.0, Internet 2.0, Internet, mobile, Internet of things, etc. These things are evolving. Since then, you need to acquire basic knowledge and you need to learn. And this is the third level, is the way that you are accelerating your skills, your learning process in order to be in phase with the new generation of the technology. And this is very important because they have a direct impact in the labor market. You need to update your skills regularly. You need to improve your skills in order to keep your job. And this is the third level. And you have people who are able to learn, able to update their skills, and people who are not able to update their skills and to learn. And the divide is about the learning process. Finally, this is, for example, let me show you some figures about these ICT skills and the basic skills, the standard and the advanced, and how the proportion of the population that they have these skills in the Arab, in the region, in the MENA region. So really, you are seeing that for the basic skills, so many countries have invested already and they have reached a certain level. But for the advanced skills, we are lacking people in this. Finally, the fourth level of the digital divide is about the impact. It's about the performance. You may have these technologies. You may use this technology even intensively. You may learn about this technology and acquire the skills, and you may have not, you are not accelerating your performance. And this is linked to the productivity paradox. That means that this technology, even if you invest in, you need to be careful because there is no direct effect on productivity and the performance. For some categories of people who are well equipped, well skilled, who are using efficiently, there will be increase in their performance and therefore in their wages. And for other people, they will use this technology, learn how to use, but they will not have any impact. And this is make that you have more inequalities in your society because the impact is not direct. And even if you invest, you need to ensure that other conditions are in place in order to have this performance. And we need to clarify that really, for example, when we have looked at this condition for the firms, not for individuals, the change that you need to make is the organizational change. You need to change the internal organization of the firm in order to be in phase with this technology change. And then when you make the technological change and the organizational change, you have the impact. Otherwise, you can invest in technology without any improvement. And this is what happened, for example, for the education system. If we look at our education system, during the last 3 decades, we have invested so many money in the education system in order to equip the educational system with laptops, whatever devices, e-education. But do we have increased the quality of the learning? Do we have more qualified students at the end, etc.? This is really the 4 level of digital divide. So if we need to observe, the 4 level of the digital divide, not only the first one, which is about the equipment. This is my first message. For sure, the gender divide is here, and especially in the MENA region. And really, as you see here, the MENA region is among the worst places for this gender divide. Here you have the difference in usage between men and women in the Arab countries. Really, it depends also because we have not something homogeneous among all the countries. In some countries, you have not this digital divide, the first digital divide between the genders. However, in other countries, you have this divide. So we have not one reality, we have several reality in MENA country regarding the gender digital divide. This is my second. For ethnic and ethnic digital divides, the question of the statistics about it's forbidden in France. We have no ethnic data. And it is the same case in Tunisia here. We have not really, so even when I have prevailed something about it, but it's not for the region, it's elsewhere. But the age divide, I'm sure that here we need special policies for. It's an evidence that we have an important and widening digital divide among Asian people, and we need a specific work for this. Let me conclude with what can be done for to cross these gaps. First, the digital literacy. I have put it as part of leaving no one behind. Leaving no one behind is not only about giving revenue, and we need also to equip all the people with digital literacy. Otherwise, they will not be able to navigate in this digital. Second, we need to increase the affordability, especially for lower income earners. For example, one of my suggestion was in different fora is to say, we need to cut the energy subsidies, but we need to put in place subsidies for internet, subsidies for ICT. This is key, especially for the lower income earners. We need also to develop internet infrastructure, because now most of the region rely only on mobile. And this is, according to me, a great vulnerability. We need also to invest in broadband, because some application will need broadband, because the new technology, especially Industry 4.0, need the broadband. We need really to have the bandwidth, which is very important. And we need not to have this dependence only for dependence to some firms in the mobile phone. For sure, we need to address the gender gap, and we need to have specific action for female in the country, in our region. And finally, really, we need to improve the skills in the education system, because the technology are evolving so fast, and this technology will be at the core of the job market. So we need to catch up in this, especially by promoting, as I have said Monday, problem solving, communication, creativity, and collaboration. The skills about this technology are not only linked to the technology, they are also behavioral skills. So thank you so much for listening to me and hear some papers about this theme that I have wrote. Thank you. Thank you, Noha.
Thank you very much for this presentation, Dr. Adel. It's really quite helpful to remind us all that digital divide needs to be unpacked the way you have done in terms of access, usage, skills, and finally impact. And you reminded us that the impact is not linear, and we need to unpack the non-linearity of digital access and its benefits and connections to other economic and social positive results is not straightforward. So thank you for this observation. And also you've reminded us in your so what section of the presentation of very important messages related to leaving no one behind, related to the broadband issue, which is an issue that will require public investments and governments need to start to think carefully about that. And finally, a very important message of yours on the enhancement of skills, not only technological ones and technical ones, but behavioral ones, from problem solving to in creativity and collaboration. Indeed, skills very much lacking in many of the new generations that graduate from respectable universities around the MENA region. So thank you very much for these powerful messages. We move on now to Dr. Shahid. So over to you, Dr. Shahid.
Thank you. Good afternoon and good morning. And thank you also for inviting me. My name is Shahid Yusuf. I'm Chief Economist of the Growth Dialogue in Washington, DC, and also non-resident fellow at the Center for Global Development. Most recently, I've been working on innovation systems in East Asia, primarily looking at China and Korea, and also working on issues relating to climate change and extreme weather events, which are particularly problematic in the United States these days. So it's a pleasure to be joining this roundtable discussion, and let me sort of plunge right in. As you know, the future of work in the digital era has attracted immense discussion, which has been supercharged by the COVID pandemic. While digital technology has enabled many firms to survive and given rise to new services, it has downsides. The biggest worry it has aroused concerns the future of employment opportunities. Will there be enough good jobs for all those looking for jobs? Or must countries, both developed and developing, contend with an expanding army of unemployed and unemployable workers with all of the attendant problems? As you know, such fears are not new. The first industrial revolution aroused similar worries in the late 18th and 19th centuries as machines displaced workers, starting with textiles and then extending to other industries. They resurfaced in the 1960s as factory automation and later computerization gave rise to talk of mass unemployment. And I have several books on my shelf about mass unemployment in that time. Since the turn of the century, technological change is once again threatening to sweep away jobs, not just in manufacturing, but also a multitude of service sector jobs that seemed at one time to be relatively secure. The fears voiced 2 centuries ago proved to be largely groundless. Technological change, by stimulating economic growth and the spread of industry, created an abundance of opportunities. And because the process of structural change was relatively gradual, adjustment was spread over decades. This minimized the costs and hardship. The second industrial revolution, which initiated the automation of industrial processes, the increased use of robots, and the spread of computerization, ushered in a golden age of development. Advances in technology raised productivity and incomes, multiplied the number of new occupations, and absorbed millions into urban services, which, as you know, rapidly overtook industry as the principal source of employment, which is the case in every country now. This long economic boom, which continued through the turn of the century, greatly benefited from globalization in its several manifestations. We are now in the throes of the third or fourth industrial revolution, depending on how you count these revolutions. We are also well into the third decade of digitalization. We are past peak globalization and are witnessing both a slowing of trade growth and some consolidation of global value chains. We have lived through a major crisis in 2009, followed by a long recession, and are barely recovering from the COVID pandemic. And most strikingly, we are observing over the past decade and more a slowing of factor productivity growth, even though the pace of digital innovation appears to be accelerating. Slowing factor productivity and GDP growth and continuing rapid diffusion of labor displacing technology has revived old nightmares, the threat of persistent structural unemployment, declining social mobility, and widening income inequality. These fears have been exacerbated by headwinds created by climate change and by demographic factors. Developed countries and China worry over the aging and decline of populations, while many developing countries, including in MENA, struggle with the bulge of unemployed youth with more to come. This time, the threat from technological change is different and arguably more acute. Let me address two questions. First, are the current worries regarding labor displacement by digital technologies misplaced or real? And second, what are the implications for the Middle East regarding technology diffusion and employment outcomes? As you are aware, concerns regarding labor displacing technological change have been fanned by a slew of projections. With the global economy needing to absorb 750 million new workers between 2010 and 2030, the projections have taken on an unusually ominous ring. Although the focus is mainly on advanced countries, employment prospects in emerging markets could be hit equally hard as they share many of the occupational groupings. One of the earliest and most frequently cited study is by Frey and Osborne. They estimated that digital technologies could displace 47% of workers in the United States, spread across 702 occupational groupings. Other estimates have followed. A study by Mark Murrow of Brookings concluded that automation could put 25% of jobs at high risk in the United States and 36% at moderate risk. More than a third of jobs could be imperiled in Finland, 59% in Germany, and between 45% and 60% in Europe as a whole. A report by the McKinsey Global Institute projected the loss of 30% of jobs to automation worldwide by 2030, and with 375 million workers affected. This report and others noted that jobs in factories that absorb the unskilled and those with high school education or less are becoming fewer, even though the volume of manufacturing output is increasing. The nearly 2,000 experts surveyed by Pew Research also concluded that large numbers of occupations would shed jobs. Overall, some 20 million or more manufacturing jobs could be lost to robots by 2030 worldwide, with each industrial robot eliminating between 1.6 and 3.9 workers. Unemployment is not the only worry. Automation could raise productivity, but by displacing labor, it might depress wages and worsen inequality. There could also be a partial de-skilling of the workforce, with several craft skills currently earning high wages becoming redundant, and more time will be spent monitoring machines than in actually making things. There is an emerging consensus on which occupations are most imperiled. Routine, repetitive, assembly line jobs, whether in the auto sector, food production, or the making of garments, could be and are most easily automated out of existence by industrial robots and eventually the Internet of Things. Just like the agricultural workforce is shrinking, even though the volume of output is growing, so also fewer and fewer people will work in industry. But that's not all. Many current occupations and services could take a bigger hit. Digital technologies aided by artificial intelligence are poised to displace numerous routine, clerical, and retail jobs, and jobs in the hospitality industry, all big employers. The weeding out process may not stop there. In a book titled The World Without Work, Daniel Susskind foresees continuing task encroachment. He, along with other researchers, maintains that advances in AI will put a host of cognitively demanding white-collar jobs in the line of fire. Professional and skilled workers will not be spared, with more jobs lost through substitution than will be replaced through machine labor complementarity. The surviving minority will be those with specialized tertiary level skills. They will work with machines, write the algorithms, train the neural networks, and invent, design, and engineer the hardware that undergirds digital technologies. In this extreme version of this Darwinian digital world, a small technocratic elite who pull the digital strings would thrive. A sizable minority would be consigned to jobs which cannot be automated, including many low-skilled personal services, old and new. This would leave a large fraction of the workforce with few, if any, opportunities in the formal sector. They would become a part of the permanently unemployed. Hence the interest in transfer programs such as universal basic income. Mercifully, the evidence to date is somewhat reassuring. The combined effects of technology, globalization, and other factors have increased inequality, and the share of labor in GDP has drifted downwards worldwide. But so far, research has not uncovered a significant winnowing of jobs in either advanced or developing countries. There has been displacement, but nothing that approximates the projections. In Japan and in Germany, for example, robot intensity appears to have stimulated demand for labor, or at least has not resulted in net reduction. Data from Germany shows that robotization reduced manufacturing employment by 275,000 between 1994 and 2014. However, the displaced workers were absorbed into other jobs in their workplace with some retraining. New entrants who would have joined the factory workforce found employment in services, which averted a net loss of jobs. Other work by David Kleinert on the European Union concluded that so far the increased use of robots has not led to a decline in aggregate employment or net job losses affecting low-skilled workers. It appears that at least through 2019 that most workers, whether in developed countries or in developing ones, had either managed to hold on to their jobs or to find alternative employment. This could change. The inroads by artificial intelligence over the past decades have been relatively modest. Its effects on the aggregate level of employment and wages have yet to surface. But AI and other digital technologies are improving and acquiring capabilities by the day. And at this rate, jobs for workers in non-automated tasks may not offset the workers displaced by intelligent machines. The COVID pandemic, by promoting digitalization, may accelerate labor displacement and leave less time for adjustment. Many firms, including ones in MENA, have adopted digital technologies to survive, especially providers of services. Firms have found that they can dispense with labor and improve the bottom line. Very likely, as normalcy returns, these labor displacing technologies will not be abandoned, and some jobs are lost for good. Quite possibly, as the technologies diffuse, they will spawn additional labor-saving innovations. In other words, the COVID experience and lingering fears of future pandemics and disruptions affecting the workforce may speed up the adoption of technologies that minimize the use of labor. Let me now turn to my second questions on the implications for MENA. Most countries in the region are behind the curve in adopting digital technologies, and this came out in some of the earlier presentations. Technology diffusion is greatest in the GCC countries, and with the low-income countries least exposed. But since 2007, the gap between the OECD average and MENA has widened in labor market efficiency, business sophistication, technological readiness, and innovation. Neither public nor private firms appear to have taken full advantage of digital technologies, possibly because of managerial inertia, a shortage of skills, or because they are not being compelled by competition, whether domestic or foreign. One additional reason could be that protected state enterprises absorbing a significant fraction of the workforce are reluctant to lay off workers and slow to assimilate technology. The technological sluggishness is also signaled by the slow pace of diversification into higher value and more complex activities between 1970 and 2015. A related implication is that countries in MENA may not be experiencing the job displacing and income polarizing effects of digital technologies to the same extent as are the advanced economies. This jives with the apparent stability in the distribution of incomes, however unequal, over the past decade and more. A McKinsey study concluded that 45% of the work activities in 6 Arab countries surveyed could potentially be automated, with Egypt at the higher end, about 48%, and Saudi Arabia at the lower end, about 41%. The sectors most exposed to automation and to digital technologies are labor-intensive manufacturing, transportation, wholesale, and construction industries. So also are hospitality, food services, and retail, all major employers in many, if not most, of MENA. The jobs least exposed are the same everywhere: in education, in health, and in the arts. Larger countries such as Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Algeria, and Morocco, with a higher percentage of workforce engaged in manufacturing and construction, could be faced with more redundancy than the average economy in MENA. Unskilled workers with high school education or less are more likely to be displaced. Younger workers and women already experiencing high rates of unemployment could be among the hardest hit. In the GCC countries, but not elsewhere in MENA, more than 90% of the jobs which could potentially be automated are currently performed by expatriates. The only exception is administration and government, where nationals do about 2/5 of the work. Thus, automation would mainly displace expatriates who could be required to return to their home countries. Looking a decade or more ahead, the advent of fintech, of blockchain, the widespread use of automated trading, ease of credit scoring, the increasing use of digital technology by the medical and legal professions, and for educational purposes, could begin to erode middle-level white-collar jobs in both high and middle-income countries. However, those in managerial positions or engaged in operations requiring technical skills of a higher order will continue to enjoy job security and rising incomes. The process could be accelerated by the COVID crisis. By putting pressure on balance sheets, it may compel firms to accelerate the adoption of digital technology and trim costs by laying off excess staff, as has happened in European countries and North America over the past 18 months. What does appear likely is that most talented, highly educated, and mobile individuals will benefit from a continuing improvement in their job prospects. They can thrive in a digitalizing environment. Thanks to IT, they already enjoy global reach and can command salaries comparable to those earned by their peers in the advanced economies. In other words, while the job opportunities and wages of low-skilled workers in industry and services are compressed by overseas competition and by the march of automation, skilled and technical workers are currently at no such disadvantage. Their geographical mobility and the ease with which they can telecommute allows them to access to the global marketplace. Unless globalization takes a long step backwards and digitization will be very advantageous for those with expertise that is in demand. Although there are drawbacks, Middle Eastern countries cannot afford to delay technology adoption where appropriate to stimulate the growth of productivity and incomes. Making high-speed broadband more widely accessible would build tech literacy, improve the earnings of the rural population and women, and narrow the digital divide, as again noted by earlier speakers. Easier and cheaper access could encourage adoption of technologies, especially by lagging small and medium enterprises. They would create business opportunities and promote startup activity. How rapidly the process could unfold will be a function of many factors. I can think of at least 10. Public policies incentivizing the use of digital technologies. Labor laws that limit the freedom of companies to lay off workers and require costly severance payments. Relative factor prices, that is, the cost of capital relative to that of labor. The speed with which the cost of robots and digital hardware declines. The adaptability of machine learning for a variety of tasks. The availability of skills to utilize digital technology. Organizational changes to make productive use of automated technologies. The fixed and operating costs of capital-intensive production processes. Workers can be fired, but robots cannot. Social pressures could constrain the use of technologies displacing workers, given the high rates of youth unemployment. And lastly, demand for products and services that are digital technology and skill intensive. One can speculate that in the interests of competitiveness and growth, governments and private firms will be under pressure to adopt the new technologies. How soon this will happen is open to conjecture, and undoubtedly, low-income countries and those beset with socio-political problems will lag the rest. Once these technologies diffuse through the system, organizational restructuring and the displacement of labor by smart machines will occur at a faster pace. This has the potential to increase inequality as it has in mature economies, unless it's offset by the emergence of new occupations that command high wages and can absorb laid-off workers. If the formal sector generates fewer jobs, the unemployed and newcomers would be compelled to seek low-paid informal work, which seems to be the lot of so many in MENA even today. Poor job prospects could erode the incentive to invest in education and skills, and this could compound the problem. This would, as I say, compound the skill deficit that derives from the unequal access to education currently and from the very poor quality of the training that is imparted. The COVID pandemic has injected an additional dose of uncertainty. Much depends on how long the effects persist and the speed with which global GDP and trade growth rebound. With respect to digital technology adoption in MENA, it's by no means obvious that firms will seize this opportunity to automate their operations and dispense with workers, as might be the case in some advanced economies. Industry 4.0 technology could begin to make deeper inroads in high-income economies, but the pandemic shock need not spur automation of light manufacturing in middle-income countries, as relative cost will still favor labor use. Because key sectors of MENA economies have been hard hit, in particular energy, tourism, and the transport sectors, governments have less fiscal headroom. Also, surviving firms are faced, at least in the near term, with shrinking markets and saddled with heavier debt burdens. Therefore, investment in digital technologies and in associated intangible capital might have low priority over the medium term. Moreover, because countries are minimally integrated with manufacturing global value chains, this lessens the pressure to upgrade the technology in the interests of competitiveness. The near-term priority is to extinguish the COVID pandemic, and as the global economy recovers, to take full advantage of export opportunities and to attract foreign direct investment. The medium-term priority is to undo the COVID-induced erosion of intangible and workforce capital and to deepen skills. To improve longer-term growth prospects, generate adequate job opportunities, and reduce income inequality, countries in the region will need to raise productivity. Effective harnessing of technology will play a vital role. And by building human capital, it will be easier to assimilate technology and to ensure that the workforce has the skills for the jobs that eventually do become available. All these projected developments are subject to a lot of uncertainty. As a famous person once remarked, prediction is difficult, especially if it is about the future. The uncertainty is compounded by the threat posed by climate change and the need to engage with the greening of growth. One can visualize a positive scenario in which the greening imperative speeds up technological change, growth, and employment. I continue to hope that we will never have to endure a darker scenario. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shahid Yusuf, for this intervention. I really find it extremely important that you have underlined the fact that fewer and fewer people will work in industries and service sector areas that are, for the MENA region, labor intensive, labor creating and labor absorbing. This is a serious observation. And it's good that throughout your presentation, you've made connections to COVID as just an example of how those shocks to our systems coming ahead of us more and more will create that incentive for digitizing and automation. So we all have to stop and think carefully if our industries, and more importantly, since the MENA region has deindustrialized in the past few decades, more important than our industries, it's our service sector become more digitized. What will we do with the surplus labor? And thank you for reminding that other cases such as Japan and Germany and other EU countries are showing that the scenario might not be gloomy. But the question is, how can we avoid that? And here you gave a fantastic set of themes, I would call a research agenda, to calibrate the positive and the negative implications of digitization and automation in the MENA region. There is a lot in every single point out of the 10 you mentioned that requires still more research. Thank you for that intervention. Last but not least, I'll turn the mic over to Vladimir Lasny from UNESCO to finish us up with the presentations before we open it up for questions. Over to you, Vladimir.
Okay, thank you so much, Noha. And so I'm an economist with UNESCO, which is the regional branch of UN headquarters. We are in Beirut. And here at ESQA, I work in the poverty and inequality team, where most recently we're working on projections of poverty and inequality, both in money dimensions as well as multidimensional poverty and inequality for the post-COVID years. And so in my presentation now, given that everything has already been said by the preceding three speakers, I have the kind of leisure to maybe just talk about some anecdotal observations and a specific activity that was undertaken by UN ESQA in Lebanon. And I will talk a little bit about the evidence from that activity. So, in my presentation, I will talk about the mismatch of skills and human capital between the current workforce in the region, and then specifically in Lebanon, compared to what is needed in jobs of today and in the coming years. And of course, this presentation is a bit speculative, and so take it with a grain of salt. So I would say my first observation or impression is that the workforce in the Arab region is highly skilled, but there are some mismatches between what workers have, what employers need, And I think for that, it's useful to think about first, the mismatch between workers and employers in terms of hard skills. And I think the evidence from our current survey work in Lebanon suggests that there might be some mismatch in hard skills between workers and jobs because it seems that employers are rather rigid, inflexible in the hard skills they demand of their hires, and workers on their end, when they are seeking retraining and upskilling during their careers, they seem to also be rigid in, they stick to the area in which they have been trained, and they rarely venture to other domains or scientific areas. Second, there might be a mismatch in the soft skills between workers and employers. Again, the survey work by UNESCO suggests that when employers write job advertisements, they write a very specific job title. They write a very specific hard skill that they require, and then they go into in much more detail talking about the soft skills they want of the applicants. So there are typically more questions about soft skills than about hard skills demanded from workers. And at the same time, we have some evidence from the worker side that even when they are retraining in terms of their hard skills or upskilling in terms of their hard skills, most workers also show interest in improving their soft skills. So they take courses in leadership, management skills, teamwork and collaboration, and so on. And the third aspect of the mismatch, we could say, is between sectors or regions where employers are located versus where job applicants are located. And so a kind of a puzzle to explain is why we have the coexistence of shortage of jobs and shortage of workers in nearby locations or nearby sectors. Okay, so that's my first message, that it's important to think about the skill match, and there are several components of the skill match to think about. Okay, and let me just say it one more time. So in terms of hard skills, we should think that workers are used to particular computer platforms, industrial processes, jargon, while in particular sectors or at employers, they use other platforms, industrial processes, and jargon. In terms of soft skills, workers feel that they don't have adequate skills at creativity, adaptability, independence, critical thinking, and leadership. And so do employers. They probe more on these soft skills of their prospective hires. In terms of pockets of excess of labor supply or excess of labor demand, we can think of advantaged regions versus disadvantaged regions, or regional divide in countries. But we can also think of sectors or particular firms that some firms might be seen as uncompetitive or not sufficiently dynamic from the perspective of workers compared to international firms or compared to other domestic firms. And so we might have a firm or sector which doesn't attract candidates as much as nearby very similar firm or sector. Okay. My second observation is that, well, like the previous speaker said, there are certain structural inequalities, and they are perpetuated in some way. We could think that there are at least three ways in which structural inequalities in labor markets are perpetuated. One, by social norms. So, for example, the role of women in caretaking in their families is a problem, both on the we can say both on the labor demand and also skill supply side. Not only employers seem to discriminate against female workers, as Paul said, but women take this information into account, and they feel constrained by their caretaking responsibilities, and they don't invest in their skills. So I will talk about that again in a few minutes on what's the gender composition of applicants taking lifetime retraining courses. Second type of structural inequality is there are some glass walls between regions. So there might be mobility constraints. We see that in Lebanon, that in the Bekaa Valley, in the east, we have a completely different labor market than in the Beirut area, and so on. These glass walls also exist between formal and informal jobs. So we can talk about the duality of labor markets, which exists and is expected to continue in the coming years, unless there is some public intervention. So this duality between formal and informal labor market, also the duality between public sector, private sector, and foreign jobs exists. Some workers are on track for public sector employment versus private sector versus foreign jobs. And it's hard for workers, or workers are not motivated to make a switch from one type of sector to another. And third kind of structural divide is by unequal opportunities. So different regions have different infrastructure. So I think in Lebanon, it's very clear that some regions suffer from inadequate energy supply, internet, even clean water these days. And these unequal opportunities are also large at the household level. So some households have wasta or connections or other assets that allow young workers to be successful, and other households don't have that. Okay, and of course there's a lack of accommodation for some marginalized statuses, like both educational centers and employers are not used to deal with workers with disabilities, for example, and so some workers are naturally marginalized in the labor market. And final big observation, I think, applying to the Arab region is what is sometimes called the low value added or low performance of local workers. And for that, we typically talk about the informal economy, the precarious jobs that don't allow workers to invest in their career advancement. Workers are demotivated. Workers might lose their human capital and skills because of the lack of regulation, let's say, in that part of the economy. There's limited mobility of workers across sectors and regions. And there is brain drain due to outmigration. So there's some selection problem where the most skilled workers might choose to outmigrate for various reasons rather than stay around. So at the end of my presentation, I'll talk a little bit about some policy recommendations to deal with these issues. So now let me spend a few minutes. Yes?
Could I kindly ask you to try to get to the policy recommendations, because we only have 10 minutes left.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
So in a few, in just 3-4 minutes, I will talk about the source of evidence we have for Lebanon. ESQA has recently developed the ESQA Job Monitor, which is a big data tool that scoops job advertisements from major online platforms. And from this, we have the evidence from the labor supply market on how much, what types of companies, what types of jobs and skills are needed. And from this tool, I will only talk about the Lebanese experience. And I think there are 3 key observations from there. One, the future of work seems to be already here, because even from looking at the job titles, the major job titles are software developer, technical architect, net developer, assurance service associate, graphic designer, is already the main type of workers needed. As I said earlier, employers have a very specific, rigid, hard skill that they need. So they ask for skills in sales, management, business administration, graphic design, Java, application programming, very specific, narrow skills. In terms of soft skills, as I said, they probe many more various skills in terms of leadership, project management, critical thinking, experience with collaboration. And now, using this evidence from the labor supply, let's see what we know about workers. On this front, UN ESQA has partnered with the Ministry of Labor in Lebanon to offer online certified learning opportunities on the Coursera platform, which offers 3,000 different training courses. And we have data on students who took advantage of this opportunity. So the first message here is that motivation for upskilling and retraining is great. There were 40,000 applicants registered from Lebanon, which is 1% of Lebanon's population, roughly. 25,000 of these applicants completed their courses. They took 44,000 courses, so more than one per person. And this is equivalent to 550,000 learning hours. So this is a big bulk of learning that was provided for free by UN ESQA and the Ministry of Labor. Who were these people interested in retraining? More than half of them were unemployed. 60% were women. Most of them were in their 20s. And most of them were in their junior or mid-career job tracks. So we can conclude that this is a good opportunity for women to increase their skills. And particularly, it seems to be a useful way to increase the skills of junior and mid-career workers. So not low skill, not senior workers. And this suggests that there are some constraints that prevent other workers from benefiting from this opportunity. First, older workers are underrepresented. Second, married women and mothers are very rare in the sample. Third, applicants from rural areas are much less represented than from urban areas. This suggests that information about this training opportunity, access to electricity and internet are crucial, and some workers just don't have these opportunities. Employed workers are also underrepresented, which we could think as a problem that currently working people don't have an opportunity to be retrained and advance their career. Second message is, so there seems to be a lot of interest in retraining, but there are clear structural constraints by type of worker. The potential in future work is great. Most courses taken were business related, blockchain, data science, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, and so advanced courses like that. But as I said earlier, most students also take some soft skill courses in terms of social skills, leadership, teamwork and collaboration, and so on. Okay, and the last message from this evidence is that there seems to be some potential for brain drain because most participants take course, there's limited match between the skills demanded by employers, as we know from the job monitor, and the courses taken by applicants. And this suggests that maybe workers take courses that would help them in their career abroad rather than in the local Lebanese market. Going to recommendations. One, regional governments should empower marginalized workers. As I said, older workers, those less skilled, married and caretaker workers should be given greater opportunities to take advantage of career advancement opportunities. Governments might do work to encourage diversification of reskilling and upskilling among workers. They might incentivize workers to invest in skills that are demanded in the local labor market, and they might, and the governments might offer resources and incentives for greater vertical upskilling in terms of soft skills, as well as horizontal retraining in terms of hard skills that workers have. There's a great need for market guidance to reduce the mismatch between the skills that workers have and the skills that employers need. The governments could do a better job guiding employers to create jobs taking into account local skill supply. Facilitating mobility of workers and of employers to deal with the problem of pockets of unemployment and shortage of workforce in nearby pockets. And there might be, and the governments might do more to coordinate between educational providers and companies so that again, to incentivize workers to learn skills that local companies need. Finally, let me say, okay, I think this is the last message that I wanted to relay. So this is all from me. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Vladimir. We have practically ran out of time and went 2 minutes over the time. I can see in front of me 2 questions in the Q&A chat room. One of them I would like Professor Adel to address directly in the chat room about where is Lebanon in the data set that Professor Adel used. So maybe please go ahead and respond to Amal, who asked that question right into the chat room. The other question asked also by Amal is an interesting one, in fact, and it has to do with digitalization and its impact on measures fighting and combating corruption. I know none of you was given that sort of guideline to talk about the impact of digitization and automation on political indicators of governance, such as corruption, although we all know, of course, that corruption does have intersections with inequality in very big ways. So what I'll do right now, because we are really out of time, is maybe request our participants, panelists and guests to just hang on with us for another 5 minutes, no more. Panelists, all of you do not have to answer to the corruption question. Think about what your research and the observations and data points you have in your own work could say about the connection between digitization, automation, and fighting corruption. Feel free to say whatever observations you have, and if you have none to that connection with corruption, that's okay. You don't have to speak. While you collect your thoughts about that, and your thoughts will be expressed, please, in no more than 1 minute. While you do that, I want to ask Romero to come in here for no more than 2 minutes and give us, if you can, Romero, and I apologize for the tightness of time, a very quick summary, headlines of how this ERF and partners global conversation has helped us come up with some interesting messages and observations on the future of work in the global South. Romero, sorry for giving you a tight time span, but we'd like to hear from you the summary of other regions' observations on the future of work. Over to you.
Okay, thanks, Noha. Just 2 or 3 minutes to tell you about our series of dialogues on the future of work. We have been working a lot on the future of work, trying to bring the voice of the South in international fora and in different conversations. And we found this powerful global narrative about the future of work, saying that we will manage technology to bring new jobs, and that we need to repeat the past in a way, the past industrial revolutions. And we ask ourselves about the global South. We don't want to repeat the past. We want to do things differently. So that's why we engage in these dialogues on trying to get context-intensive views on the future of work. And regarding inequality, I think that we hear this story in the North and globally, even in international organizations, about first, this idea that we are in the most, we have a inequality crisis now because of technology and globalization. And second, this idea of hollowing out, right? Polarization of the labor market. Now, the data that we are gathering from different regions and the papers and the discussions that we had in Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Latin America points to a different story. First, that inequality at the global level is decreasing and not increasing, thanks to, of course, China and partly India being part of the global community and the global market. And second, that we don't see evidence of hollowing out in the labor market. That seems good in a way, but also we are paying this, in a way, we are avoiding more inequality by low growth and low productivity growth in our economy. So there is a trade-off there. We say we don't want to be part of this process of hollowing out and polarization, but we are paying with low growth, long-term growth. So this is really a very interesting story. And just in 1 minute, in Asia, maybe the problem is not polarization, but inequality at the top. Maybe in some parts of Africa is the same, particularly South Africa. But then in Latin America, when I was listening to you in this discussion, I heard a lot of things that reminds me of Latin American problems, of structural inequality, of dual economies, So inequality is not because of new technologies are bringing changes in the tasks that people do, but structural inequality is preventing technology or new ideas to come into our regions, regarding skills, regarding technology, regarding institutions, regarding many and other aspects. So structural inequality, I think that must be a central part of the future of work agenda in Global South. And let me just finish with one idea, that maybe trying to think about structural inequality and thinking policies that address these issues by design. I mean, makes us think about different policies for different firms, different workers. I mean, we need to think that we are always thinking about the core of the more innovative sectors in our economies, but we need to also think at the marginal, and then if we look at make choices about technologies, about skill development programs, and so on. So in a way, our series of dialogues, I think that brings new policy frameworks that try to include this inequality by design. Thanks, Noha.
Thank you very much, Romero. I gave you a very, very hard task to summarize other regions' conversations in less than 3 minutes, and you did very well. Thanks a million for that. And particularly your message about let's not forget structural inequalities being the mediator of any positive technological impact. Thank you for that. Back to the panel. Does anyone feel like they want to say something about Amal's question in the chat room, linking digitization, automation, and technology in general to the MENA region's fight to combat corruption? I see Shahid with his hand up. Very good. Then please, Dr. Shahid. And then Dr. Adel.
Yeah. I think when there was a lot of hope that the internet and discussions over the internet would increase more transparency and accountability. And I think to some extent it may actually have done so. But what one sees in a number of countries is the increasing control over the internet, which governments in particular, and I'm thinking of the Great Firewall, in a well-known country, that this is actually the censorship which is being introduced is suppressing inconvenient information that would minimize or reduce corruption in these countries. And therefore, going forward, it would seem to me that while there is potential to improve governance, to reduce corruption, to, as I say, increase transparency, the forces arrayed against this seem to be getting a little stronger because governments are finding it much easier to exercise the kind of oversight and censorship which suppresses this.
I apologize to Professor Makdisi. I did not see your hand up. Now I do. So you will be the last person to address the issue after Dr. Adel in a minute or less. Please go ahead, Dr. Adel.
Thank you very much, Noah. I would like to highlight just 2 points. The first one, for some technology, we may find a good reason for not adopting them. And I think that some delays in adoption of some technologies are linked to the question, which is an excellent question. So, for example, if you look at the at some administration, they have the already all digitalized, but they are using forms, etc., and they are written in in sheets the data they collected. That means that there are really how can I say, not in some cases we have a good reason for not adopting them, and maintaining the system with the corruption may explain in some countries why these technology are less adopted. The second one, which is very important linked to this, is when we observe what happened with the COVID-19, for example, in Tunisia, we have an expansion, a rapid expansion of the informal economy. So people goes to internet, but goes in an informal way, not informal way. That means that with a web page, with just an account in Facebook, you can sell anything. And from this, you have tax evasion. And the collection of tax it's less than previously, because people are going to this informal economy, and you need really to invest in order to invest in a system, technological system, in order to combat this. And that means that really the question of digitalization and will be central, because we have a threat to the threat of expansion of informal economy in the digital world in Arab countries. And this will create less resources for the states. So really the state need to invest in this. And the corruption will move also in the digital world. Thank you very much, Noah, for allowing me to.
Thank you very much. And finally, Professor Paul Makdisi.
Very, very quick answer. The digitalization allows us to fight corruption. It gives us the tool to fight corruption. Depends who owns digital power. And it brings us back to what I said, concentration of power. Since the question comes from Lebanon, so you know that the two richest men in Lebanon, one of them being the actual nominated person for prime minister, have made their fortune in the digital sector with telecommunication. And I'm not sure these guys will use their technology to fight their own corruption. So this is for Lebanon, but we can extrapolate for other countries.
Thank you very much. We have come to the end of this session. Apologies for our listeners and watchers who had to stay with us for 15 minutes extra. We had excellent conversations that I'm not going to summarize, but just leave you with a strong message that came from all of our distinguished panelists, that technology, like many other things, come with potential good and potential vice, and it all depends on the structural inequalities embedded in MENA economies and political economies, and that need to be calibrated. And I particularly like very much the final closure that we did, connecting technology not only to work and labor and inequalities from an economic perspective, but also to good governance. And I leave with you this message. Again, here, technology comes with good and bias. It increases efficiency. It may increase service delivery. It may increase tax collection efficiencies, but it may also have its downside in terms of individual rights and privacy, as well as the ability to regulate tech giants and their currently complete monopoly of the industry and its unknown algorithms and unknown dynamics, unknown to us until we catch up. Thank you very much, ERF and ERF's partners, for putting on this session and all the series that started on July 26th. They are all recorded. You can find the recording and enjoy the insights that were very, very much part of this intention to do the cross-regional comparative work on the future of work. Thanks for having me join this session, and goodbye.